All right. Well, this is again Brent Raynes for Alternate Perceptions Online Magazine, and doing another interview with Dr. Gregory Liittle on the series. It's now part 7, believe it or not, on From Psychology to Indian Mounds, although we cover lots of other areas too, as we are tonight. And so it's Friday evening, the 4th of February, 2022. So, Greg, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thank you again. We'll do another one of these 15-minute routines here. And as we get into this, I'd like you to define the paranormal. Tell me what the paranormal is first. We're going to go into that, and I've got an idea of it, but how do you define the paranormal?
Well, it's a loaded term, and to me, it's all sorts of things that are anomalous, that could be unexplained or seem unusual, and UFOs could be certainly part of that definition as well. Cryptids or ghosts or religious experiences. There are all sorts of areas that fall under the broad umbrella of paranormal. So to me, it covers a vast terrain, although a lot of people try to divide all these different things into certain specific categories that don't allow for the overall things that fall under that umbrella to be part of their search and their investigations. Just like, anyway, just like in ufology, we don't a lot of times deal with the cryptid elements or paranormal on the psychic poltergeist or whatever, but
Well, the thing about cryptids, technically, wouldn't the beings inside of UFOs or the beings associated with abductions sometimes fit that category as a cryptid?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's in fact, the beings they're not really, there are certain kind of almost archetypal models that kind of fit, like the Greys or the Nordic.
Well, even the Nordic, those tall Nordic women that had the long blonde hair that stepped out of saucers, supposedly in the 1950s, those are archetypes too. Those are archetypal or stereotypical symbolic images. My definition of the paranormal is pretty much the same thing, but it's like it casts a big umbrella and it covers these inexplicable events that occur or experiences that people have that science really has no ready explanation for. Like you said, people that have certain, I think you call them religious or spiritual experiences, but like a mystical experience where you see a glowing being that appears in front of you and then gives you some sort of message. That would be paranormal. Some coincidences, I think, are almost paranormal in nature. They are so bizarre that they simply can't be explained. Okay, the paranormal does fit the UFO field, absolutely. A lot of people want to separate out the extraterrestrial / nuts and bolts theory from all this weird stuff. And that was the stuff that they got with, against John Keel. A lot of the ufologists back in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, probably some even up to today, don't like John Keel's speculations because he's not nuts and bolts. And Keel said it's all related to the paranormal, and we're just seeing different aspects of the same thing. So I realized pretty early, and it was probably, well, it was before I met you, I realized that the UFO phenomenon really is not there may be exceptions to this, but the UFO field in general is not something connected to extraterrestrials. It is connected to an unexplained, almost inexplicable type of event, which I've already defined as something that's paranormal. Native American rituals, and that this is in the new book that's coming out probably around June. We don't know. There's big delays with paper mainly. But anyway, Native Americans in their belief system, they attempted to merge with and try to gain some sort of control over the paranormal and paranormal events. That's something shaman do. Shaman are trying to manipulate the unknown background power, whatever it is, behind their spiritual beliefs, and their spiritual beliefs explain everything in the paranormal. In fact, almost every Native American belief I can think of that's spiritual in nature relates to the paranormal. I don't think I've ever said that before. You know a great deal about Native American beliefs. Would you agree with that, or can you think of exceptions? Talk about spiritual beliefs now.
Yeah, I think that, really there's, I met two gentlemen, Tim Renner and Joshua Cutchin, back in 2019 at the Strange Realities Conference in Nashville. And they did a presentation, and I really thought it was quite excellent. It really has raised a lot of eyebrows. And it was what Jacques Vallee did in 1969 with Passport Magonia, looking at all the fairy connection and elementals, religious phenomena, connection with UFO occupants and landings, and how they're archetypes, really. And they've done the same thing looking at Bigfoot. They're called Where the Footprints End, Volume 1. It's filled with all they've also got a Volume 2 that come out shortly after I met them. But when they was telling about their investigations and research, I thought, man, these guys have, they're looking at it from the Bigfoot, showing how all these UFO and psychic elements, and it goes back centuries and centuries. They've done really good research, and I'd put it on the same, the same effect, the same level with Vallee's, Passport to Magonia, and and I've realized a lot of this this kind of stuff for quite some time, thanks to Vallee and Keel and so on. But I find myself now even looking more for the threads, not just in my interviews with people, but looking at trying to do some research, trying to catch up, like these guys talked about a lot of times with the Bigfoot cases and such, some of the cryptids, that there were the mysterious women in white that would appear, and so I've aware of that. I started looking at that. Even one of my early contacts was Ramona Clark down in Florida, who I met back in '73, and knew for a number of years. And, we did some investigations together, and she had a, experience with a close encounter with her husband and a 13-year-old son with a classic disc-shaped domed UFO. And then afterwards, the poltergeist aspects. But in my interviews with her back then, she recalled a time when she was very young, and one of these women in white apparitions appeared, in her home. And she thought it was her mother at first, and she started talking to it, and her mother called from the other room. What'd you say? And this stuff is really quite common. It's kind of like similar to the Marian apparitions. A lot of questions about some of what those what's behind some of that phenomena. So this stuff really goes back centuries. Was Ezekiel and Enoch were they contactees?
Oh, sure. Well, the whole thing is this in the UFO field. It has several major splits in it, factions, and one faction clearly sort of dominates, is sometimes sort of militant in their attacks of non-ET people, because it's the extraterrestrial faction. It's the nuts and bolts people, the people that are absolutely convinced that all the genuine UFO phenomena is extraterrestrial craft in nature. That's what it is. I do believe that it is distinctly possible that Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials. They may well have somehow seeded life here. I don't think there are thousands of beings in craft all over the earth all the time. I don't think that's going on. I think there's something else that's going on that is really related to the paranormal. I think Native Americans had a very good explanation for it. When I say Native Americans, I'm talking about material recovered from really old texts by ethnographers, where they went in and they talked to the shaman and hopefully got a lot of the key information from them. And all that's available. It's an old Smithsonian publications and some by other agencies of the U.S. government. But I think it's all related to the paranormal. But it's very, very difficult to convince people of that because of a whole bunch of psychological issues. And one of them is called selective perception, and it's related to something known as confirmation bias. And I think I'll end with those two things. So selective perception, it's like if you have a certain belief about something, if you really believe in something, you are going to pay attention mainly to things that confirm your belief. All right? You're only going to perceive those things. That is selective perception. And the idea of confirmation bias, once you have a belief, you have a bias. As soon as you believe in anything, you are a biased person about that particular topic or whatever it is. So what we do is this is all unconscious. None of this is conscious. People don't understand that with defense mechanisms. None of this is conscious. It just automatically happens. You're not aware of it. But what you do with confirmation bias is you deliberately make an attempt to find facts that confirm your belief. I've known people that will get on Google. They'll make some statement. Somebody will say, that's not true. You know, you're sitting in a restaurant or something. And they say, I just Googled it on my phone. It says you're not right. So a person who has a belief like that, who's afflicted with confirmation bias, will start searching for a particular fact or article or something that confirms their belief. And sometimes that might be found on page 20 or page 30 of a Google search. So you just keep looking till you find what confirms your belief. I have done that. I did it with a discussion with Andrew Collins and found myself in the throes of both confirmation bias and my own perceptual distortions. And it wound me up. It got me to the point to where I got on Google and I did like a big search, and it was on Federal Express, and it was about Federal Express planes maybe having an afterburner. Now, if you get on the internet and you'll search that, you won't find any evidence of any Federal Express planes having an afterburner till you get to maybe 10, 15 pages in, and then you'll see a post by a guy, an article where a guy posts a picture of a FedEx plane with a big jet in the back that looks like it has an afterburner on it, and he says it's an afterburner. Yet Federal Express says there's none. So I realized I was doing this, and I know I try to keep this in mind whenever I'm doing research or whenever I'm writing. And it's known as cherry picking in the scientific literature. They say, oh, you're only looking at the facts that support your hypothesis or your idea. Well, that's cherry picking, but cherry picking comes from both confirmation bias and the various perceptual issues, perceptual bias too. And that is the big problem in UFOs, in the whole UFO field. Once you start employing those defense mechanisms, once you have a belief, a strong belief, it's almost impossible for people to change the belief, even when they're presented with contrary evidence. And that is a very, very big deal. It is one that most people don't really conceive of. A lot of these people, I've had UFO people say, oh, you've got to have an open mind. You got to have an open mind. And I'll say, okay, but you got to have one too then. You want me to believe what you believe. You're trying to convince me of your belief, and you want me to have an open mind, and I already believe something a little different than you do, but you've already discounted mine. You don't have an open mind toward me. It's really difficult to have an open mind when you have beliefs, preconceived beliefs. It's just the way it is. So that's the problem biggest problem I see in the UFO field. Of course, there's people that protect information and want to be the first. It's unreal how many people want to be the first. There's actually a skeptic who goes and tries to find the first person that said something in the field. And even he never gets it right. He can only go back so far. Or the first thing he finds, he says, oh, I found somebody in 1899 that said this. Therefore, you stole it from them. That's his idea. So anyway, the UFO